about the social change. We're going to deal with how Oklahomans, when they came back from World War II, those soldiers and also the nurses that came back, we're going to talk about what did they expect, what did they learn. Obviously, World War II had a big, tremendous change in America because what ended up happening is after World War II, Europe was such in bad shape because the Nazis and the Italians, the Axis powers, basically went in there and just destroyed Western Europe and even parts of Eastern Europe as well. And Europe was a big mess. And so the United States had to send soldiers back over there. And this is why General Marshall gets a lot of credit because he helped execute what's called the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. And so Europe was so in bad shape. Their whole industrial economic system was in crumble. So we're having to help them rebuild their cities, rebuild their industry, as well as rebuild their countries. Whereas United States, we're just chugging along. I mean, yeah, we struggled. Not going to say we didn't, struggle during World War II. I mean, there were some times where things were a little bit rough. But when the soldiers came back, it was like, hey, let's get back to our lives. Let's start building homes. Let's have families. Let's learn some new skills. I mean, we have new technology. Also, there are African Americans who just went through war and were thinking, I just survived World War II. It's time for me to survive this war, and that's the civil rights. And so segregation laws, trying to chug those down. So we're seeing a big change in America, and we're becoming a world power. Your answer number one is 1940. Okay, so you might see that right there. So just put 1940. In 1910, we see 1 million, over 1.6 million lived in Oklahoma. 19% of that was urban. We've talked about this in previous classes. So you can see here, 19% of that was urban. By 1940, basically near the beginning of World War II, we had over 2.3 million. Now, we lost in population because you look compared to 1930, we lost, what is that, roughly about 60,000 Oklahomans. But, we had still over 2.3 million. But 51% of them moved into the urban setting. Now, part of that was the Great Depression because also the Dust Bowl, we had farmers losing, opportunity to do their part in farming. So that was part of it. So they lost their farms, so they had to go work in the cities or close in the towns to basically find other jobs. So that was part of the issue. Okay, your answer number 4 is right here in blue. Should have said that a little bit better. Number 4 is everything in blue right here for the GI Bill. And then number 2 is everything in blue down here in this point right here. So number 4 is here. And then number 2 is here. Okay? So steady jobs with good incomes and hours were found or near cities. So that's what's happening during this time is that you're seeing a lot of Oklahomans going into cities for these jobs because these cities are growing, they're booming. And then you're also seeing what is called the suburbs growing outside of that. These jobs are more reliable than the farming. And we're seeing more of the industry gathering more of these individuals. Also, what's happening during this time in 1944 was a thing called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, the GI Bill, because as the war was running down, Congress was going, we need to get a bill in place to reward these soldiers for going through what many say is the greatest war of all time. Because of who was involved, what was involved. And so this idea, and that also too reflects back to World War I because the other thing too, World War One, people forget, is there were so many veterans who came back from World War One, and everybody forgot about them. They were like, "Oh yeah, that's great." Which, by the way, a lot of people deem that the Great War, which it wasn't the Great War because World War Two came along. But what I'm saying is, in World War One, people forgot about these veterans, and a lot of them ended up homeless. And that's part of the reason why Delano Roosevelt, won the election. It won his election in 1932, and Eleanor Roosevelt was able to get that be one of our very first ladies, because she would go out and she would talk to these soldiers and say, what's happening? Why are you guys homeless? What's going on? And they're like, well, because Congress didn't give us any money that they promised. They promised us money and they never gave it to us. And then so that's part of the reason why the New Deal was put in place, to give these individuals jobs. And so a lot of these congressmen are going, we're going to need to look out for these veterans. They're going to need jobs. They're going to need funding. And so what they did is the GI Bill gave veterans money for education. So a lot of these guys are going out of college and they're going straight to college. Getting out of the war, they're going straight to college. And what's funny, because I remember I had a professor who would tell me when they would go to these colleges, some of them would join Greek life. They would join some of these fraternities. And it's funny because, a lot of these fraternities would have, what is it called? The rituals or whatever. They would, I'm blanking on it right now, what it's called, but
hazing?
Yes, hazing. So the hazing, they would have hazing for some of these, from these guys. But you got to understand, these guys just came from World War II. And so they're telling these dudes who never served in World War II, yeah, I'm not doing that. So you make me do that, I'm going to, beat you up, basically. So it's really funny. The hazing, kind of what was on the down end on that because of these World War II veterans. But they would get education. Some of them didn't get an education. That's fine. They could always get an education later if they needed to. The funding was there. But they would also be able to get a home loan. Some would get a farm loan, and so some would pick up farming, and but a lot of these men are like, I want to settle down. My sweetie's been missing me for years, and I'm finally with her. We're gonna buy a home and start a family. And that's what happened, is that they would basically, the urban growth would rise. They would find a job in the city. And the houses were hitting the market. There would see blocks of houses being built for these men to come home. That's why Midwest City was booming at the time, because a lot of these men would still stay in the military and get a job at Tinker Air Force Base. And it's like, boom, we can build these little houses. So if you go to Midwest City, you will see some of these small houses that have been built since the 1940s and 50s. And you're going, man, like, why is this house still there? I mean, part of it, it's history, and part of it's they're still well built, but that's the type of house that was there. But this created what is known as the American phenomenon as the suburb. And so this is why you have Owasso. This is why you have Broken Arrow. This is why you have Bixby. This is why you have Glenpool, all around Tulsa area. This is why in Oklahoma City you have Edmond booming the way it is. This is why you have Midwest City. This is why you have Del City. This is why you have Yukon, Mustang, more, because of this time frame with the suburbs. So there you go. Definition: it's listed on the study guide as baby boomer. I meant to say baby boom. So anyway, but baby boom. Or baby boomer is your definition on the study guide. It's everything in blue right here. So baby boom right there. So the baby boom generation comes after World War II. And this is the children after the war from 1946 to 1964. This is called the baby boom. Nearly 1 million babies born in Oklahoma. Millions upon millions of children were born. My parents are baby boomers. Don't call me a boomer, though, because I know that's the term going around referring to older people. I am not a boomer. How dare you? I know who it was. But I will talk to you Wednesday. But anyway, Do not
Boomer.
call do not call me a boomer. But I was not born in the baby boom generation. I am a Gen Xer. I'm 1982, excuse me. So anyway,
That's what a boomer would say.
sure. Yeah. Okay. Now I know who that was. Anyway, so back to by the way, this is recording. I just want to let you know. Back to
Okay, boomer.
the notes. Um, Many children were born during this time, and let's be honest, a lot of these men have missed their ladies for years, and so obviously there's going to be a lot of children born. So that's what ended up happening. A lot of children born during this time, and so when you have a lot of these kids born, we're talking millions upon millions of kids. Guess what's going to need to be built? Not just houses, but also schools, because you're going to have to find a school for these kids. So this is another reason why the suburbs boom. This is, again, I'm going to say it again: Broken Arrow, Owasso, Bixby, Jinx. I forgot Jinx this time. The Tulsa Union. These other independent school districts like Putnam City and Oklahoma City, Mustang booming, Yukon, like you name it, whatever. Moore. Why Moore has multiple high schools? Because these children needed to go somewhere for schooling. And so eventually they were going to have children upon children upon children. And so the school districts are booming because of the baby boom generation. So the number of schools also declined. Small schools closed during this time. So we do see the rural schools do take a hit at this time, but the bigger schools in near the city are growing. Also, during this time, penicillin is invented to fight off infections during the 1940s. Polio vaccine eventually would get created right around the 1950s. Polio had always been an issue even well before the 1900s. There was not really a cure for it, but there was a polio epidemic that was kind of similar to what's going on in our country um, with the coronavirus, and it was so severe, so bad. And I'll even show that video back in the day. I'll show a video of that on Wednesday if I can find it. But basically, there's basically children are the ones getting hit the most in the 1950s with the polio outbreak. And that's where the polio vaccine is then created. It's able to save many children and others from suffering from polio. Smallpox vaccine also created. This is amazing. This right here in the 1950s being created wiped out smallpox. We don't have smallpox really anywhere. I think there's very few third world countries that still have smallpox, but it's pretty much smallpox has pretty much been eradicated because of the vaccine. That's why the vaccinations are so important. That's why you need to get vaccinated. Hopefully, when it's approved by the FDA with the coronavirus, that if you take the vaccine, if everybody were to take the vaccine, there's a good chance that in about 10 to 15 years from now, who knows, COVID may be almost gone, just depending on how many arms it goes in. Now, will that happen? Probably not, because there's a lot of people who are not for vaccines, but vaccinations prove to work if they're effective, and polio and smallpox are evidence of that. Okay, number 3 is right here. For your study guide, the state legislator. Television grew to be a very popular thing. Now television, the technology comes mostly from radar. Isn't that crazy? Radar. During the time of the war, radar played a big part in the invention of television. There was a lot of screens involved. Pretty much a lot of the things that we have in our society. I'm not saying that it's all military funding, but pretty much from the 1930s to now, a lot of what we have as far as our technology, our modern technology, is due to military funding. it's not what it used to be during the times of the light bulb, where private investors were pretty much creating these new technologies. It's now the military. The military has so much money that they're creating and finding new technologies, and it's being shared with the American public. And we see that television grew out of that with military funding. It's very popular when it did come. It was not affordable at first. About half of the homes had a TV by 1954. But by 1964, 90% had at least a TV in the house. So, and then it won't be until late 60s that maybe you're able to have a family with more than one TV. I always remember the joke from Back to the Future, and he's like, oh yeah, TV. And he's like, yeah, Dad bought it for today. It's our first time to watch it. He's like, oh yeah, it's great. We have two of them. And then they're like, give him the look like, what? You have two TVs? Like, you're nuts. But anyway, 1949, WKY TV, Channel 4 in Oklahoma City, 15 hours a week, but expanded to 40 hours by 1950. And then 1953, First State Education Channel, KETA, or better known as OETA, Channel 13 in Oklahoma City. In 1956, Tulsa had KOED, Channel 11, mandated by the state legislator in, so thank you, Oklahoma. And then also what helped is Mr. Rogers. I'll tell you that story on Wednesday, how he saved PBS. So there you go. Rock and roll is your answer number 9. Rock and roll. Now it's just rock. There's no rolling anymore. But rock and roll was popular. Kids loved the loud music and the dancing. Popularized by first Elvis Presley. But here's the thing people forget about rock and roll. Rock and roll was actually an African-American form of music. It wasn't played because of African-Americans were behind the start of rock and roll. A lot of white families did not want their kids listening to that. They just like, this isn't right. It's not. It's a part of segregation, where we separate the races, and that's just wrong. But that was primarily the reason for rock and roll not being popular at first, because so many African Americans created it and popularized it. And there was a few of them that were popular. Chuck Berry, Little Richard. But it isn't until Elvis Presley comes in, and Elvis basically really puts a face to rock and roll and shows, hey, yeah, this is great, fun music. But even parents, even when they were like, fine, you can listen to it, but you can't watch him. Because here's the problem with Elvis. And I know it's a little scandalous, and I'm not able to stand up and, and show what Elvis was great, because Elvis would wiggle the hips. And I know a lot of you are like, what? How is that such a big deal? Why would parents have such a problem with Elvis, wiggling the hips? So back then, it was just not, it was just not culturally acceptable to see him wiggle the pelvis, and be that type of dancing was not allowed and not okay. And so you would see a lot of parents, like even Ed Sullivan, when Elvis came on his show, was like, okay, we're gonna film you. And there's going to be the girls in the crowd. They're going to go, ooh, Elvis Presley, wiggling the hips. But we're not going to film it. We're going to film you from the waist up. And so that's what he did. He filmed Elvis from the waist up, because the wiggling of the hips was viewed as unacceptable. So it isn't until later on that, we kind of get over ourselves and realize, it's not that big of a deal. But anyway, that Elvis makes it popular, but also makes rock and roll popular. The transistor radio, the pocket-sized transistor radio, because remember, radios were these big, heavy, almost like TVs. You kind of just kept it in your fireplace, and you basically gathered the family around. We're going to listen to the president talk, or we're going to listen to Superman on the radio. We're going to listen to Dick Tracy and all these great shows. And you couldn't really carry it with you. But now you're seeing that the radio is getting military, thanks to the military, they're able to shrink the radio, and you can carry it wherever you needed to go. And that definitely helped helped provide a way to carry on music because you can take it wherever you can go. So KOMA was one of those who carried the rock and roll format and was very popular. The Gilchrist Museum opened in 1949, displays over 10,000 works of art. Cowboy Hall of Fame. It's now the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, but opened in 1955. Mickey Mantle and Allie Reynolds wore spots with famous Oklahoma baseball players. Coach Henry Iba of Oklahoma State University won national basketball championships in 1945, 1946. Oklahoma State, woohoo! 1956, we see federal aid, Highway Act, created an interstate highway system, connected major American cities. It also provided long stretches of pavement that could be used for emergency landing strips in the event of another war. Again, this is thanks to the Germans with the Autobahn. So basically, Eisenhower helped get this passed because Eisenhower served in World War II, and he was like, they used the Autobahn to travel with their tanks and military, and they're like, oh, this is pretty nice. We need this in America. So when he became president, he was able to get that off the ground. Drive-in restaurants were popular. Drive-ins, all drive up, and teenagers would drive up with their transistor radios, order up their burgers and fries, and hang out there and listen to music. One of the very most popular ones was the Top Hat in Shawnee. Eventually, later changed its name to Sonic because of its sonic speed of your order getting out there. The first Sonic drive-in, not Top Hat, because Top Hat was the first one in Shawnee. The first Sonic drive-in was in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So Stillwater, Oklahoma had the first actual Sonic drive-in. We also see more dams and lakes built for electricity, flood control, providing water. Amusement parks like Frontier City, Spring Lake, and Wedgwood were created. We see also from 1950 to 1956, we did see some of the deadliest tornadoes. In 1947, Woodward killed 116 people. March 1948, Air Force Captain Robert Miller and Major Ernest Fawbush correctly predicted that conditions of the were right for a tornado, and the tornado came, and they were able to do what is called the first early warning system. Also, we had earthquakes. We still have earthquakes, but 5.0 quake in Canadian County was recorded in 1952. We see sit-ins. Your definition for sit-ins is right here. So there's your definition for a sit-in. A lot of blacks coming back from World War II were struggling with segregation. World War II, they were kind of viewed a little bit more as equals, even though segregation still existed in the war. But they were gaining some traction. And we see Ada Lewis Spule of Chickasaw was a black woman who denied admission to the University of Oklahoma because she was black. She eventually went to court, led to the Brown versus Board of Education decision outlawing segregated schools. So it allowed her to actually attend University of Oklahoma. Then George W. McLaurin won a case in 1950 that Oklahoma University could not treat him differently because of his race. He had been forced to sit outside the main classroom for lectures, but then he was able to join in. In 1949, Nancy Randolph Davis enrolled in Oklahoma State A&M College, but she had to sit in the back of the room or in the hall until other students demanded that she was being treated equally and said, hey, come on, just let her in the classroom. Clara Looper, as well as the NAACP, would also lead what is called sit-ins. It basically occurs when a group of people enter a public facility and refuse to leave until they are recognized for their demands are met. So what we have to understand during this time is that African Americans are slowly gaining the right or to show how equal they are in America. But the problem is it really comes down to everybody getting on board and changing their attitudes and realizing this isn't right. We shouldn't segregate. We shouldn't restrict people's rights. But until everybody gets on board and realizes their wrongs, it's going to take until the 1960s and sacrifices from many in the 1960s to get equality. All right, last thing is the Cold War. We're going to talk about that. It's still in the post-war period. After World War II, your definition for Cold War, by the way, is right here, everything in blue. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were your two big superpowers. Now, they worked together to stop the Nazis in World War II. But the problem is that Joseph Stalin, at this point, is going, you know what? I don't want to work with Truman. You know, I worked with FDR and we had a good relationship, but FDR's gone. Harry, I don't like you, and I'm not going to work with you. And ultimately, Winston Churchill, I'm not going to work with you either. And what ends up happening is because the Soviet Union didn't suffer as much as the rest of Europe, the Soviet Union looks at this as an opportunity going, these countries are in dire shape. I'm going to start taking over Eastern Europe. And he starts rigging their elections. And this is why, again, I know even today, when we go all the way back to 2016 with Russia and whether or not how much of a hand they had in our elections. Well, that type of thinking, of that concern of Putin and his hand in our government elections goes all the way back to Joseph Stalin. And it starts right here because Joseph Stalin basically would go in and he would rig much of Eastern Europe, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and he would go in at Ukraine, and he would basically rig their elections and getting them to join communism. And if the United States had not had a presence in Western Europe, in France, in Spain, in certain parts of Germany, who knows what Stalin could have done? Because yes, half of Germany would become communist, and so we see the United States trying to help Europe, and then here comes Stalin trying to capture parts of Europe, and so there's a division here, and it would lead to what is called the Cold War. Because also, what also led to the Cold War was the United States creating the nuclear missiles that we dropped on Japan. Well, that secret obviously was let out the bag. Well, we got the bomb. Well, guess who wants the bomb? Soviet Union. And they've got the funding. They're going to work on it, and they create their own nuclear weapons. And so this would ultimately cause the United States and the Soviet Union to compete for resources and can compete to be the first to do these next things, these next technological things, which we'll talk about in the last slide. But also, this leads to the United States trying to stop the Soviet Union from spreading communism. And part of that would lead to the Korean War, where the United States would support the South Koreans against communist North Korea and trying to regain the country. And ultimately, what you saw is you would see eventually that both sides would lead to a stalemate, that they would have to come in and come with an agreement that the northern half of North Korea into China, near the neighbors to China, would be communist, and then the southern part of Korea, which is South Korea, would be its own democracy. And so we had 400,000 U.S. troops that participated, and 450 Oklahomans were a part of the Korean War. And to be fair, it really wasn't a war. I mean, yes, it was a war between the Koreans, but to us, to not have it officially declared a war, it was a police action. That's what they called it, a police action, to prevent them declaring war on Korea, and because they didn't want to start another war, they didn't want to start another world war, but they at least wanted to help Korea from not becoming South Korea from not becoming communist. But there was a big fear of nuclear war attacks. I mean, there are people concerned that, oh no, Russia's going to drop the bomb. And, I'm pretty sure your grandparents can tell you the drills that they ran in school of like duck and cover, get under the desk just in case a bomb drops, which most likely it wasn't going to save you. The only thing that would probably the duck and cover makes sense is that if the bomb was safely far away, there's still the light from the bomb could possibly blind you, and that's why they would want you to duck your eyes. Number 5 is everything in blue here, and then number 11 is right there. So anyway, so number 5 here. Number 11 here. So Governor Johnston Murray said that all state employees had to swear an oath of loyalty to the United States in Oklahoma due to communist scare. There was another red scare of communism because of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. They're afraid of spies. And yes, I mean, it was literally severe. I mean, this is why we had McCarthyism, where Senator McCarthy would label people communists. Where a lot of people in Hollywood, their careers were ruined because they were labeled and blacklisted from because of their because they were labeled as communists, and they wouldn't take an oath, and they were put on the blacklist. And some famous writers were able to write some amazing scripts. I think there's a few westerns that were taken from the blacklist, but basically, these writers had to basically kind of do these small under the table jobs just to survive in Hollywood because they were blacklisted. But also, women were allowed to serve on juries during Murray's time. Governor Raymond Gary improved interstate highways, abolished segregation laws. Like I said, Clara Luper led the sit-ins to break down segregation, arrested 26 times. Governor J. Howard Edmondson voters repealed prohibition. So there's that. And then space program. Woo. This is where we start to see that Russia or the Soviet Union at the time and the United States really compete. So the Soviet Union launched the first satellite, the Sputnik 1. So Soviet Union is your answer, number 6, in 1957. Then also number 7 is Mercury right here. Definition for astronaut is right there, and number 12 is right here. All right, so Sputnik 1 was launched, and when it was launched, a lot of people freaked out. Like they were like, "Oh my goodness, what is that? What's that thing in the sky? Oh no, the Soviets have launched a satellite that's going to drop bombs on us." Oh, I know you think I'm overreacting. I'm not. Seriously, it caused a lot of panic. People were like, "Oh no, they're going to drop bombs on us." No, it didn't. The Sputnik, honestly, all it did was a testing satellite. It basically went around the world, and all it did was this flashing red light, and it would beep back. It would just signal back to the Soviets. That basically said, "Oh, it's connecting to us. It worked. Yay!" That's all it did. But because of the fears of the Soviets finally reaching space with Sputnik, the United States goes, we better jump on this space stuff. And so they were able to create what is called the Explorer, its first satellite launched by the United States, and NASA was created. This is how NASA got created because of the scare of the Soviets taking over space and eventually creating the Mercury program. Now, we didn't send the first man in space, but we did eventually have a lot of achievements with the Mercury program. We're able to send the first men in space. Astronauts are human voyagers into space, so that's your definition for astronauts. But we were able to send a lot of astronauts who did a lot of things like orbiting around the Earth and successfully coming back into the atmosphere. And so we were able to do a lot of achievements. Captain Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr. Of Shawnee was a pilot of Faith 7. We see Geraldine M. or Jerry Cobb of Oklahoma. She was supposed to be one of the very first women of Mercury pilot to go into space, but eventually the rules got changed or blocking women astronauts. So it would take until the 80s to finally send a woman astronaut into space. But we had a lot of achievements, and luckily, as we go into 1960s, what happened because of the work here from NASA in the 1950s into the 60s, it helped launch us to the moon, and that was a huge step for us. But that is